Hey folks, it's Jenny. I am here to talk you through a whole bunch of stuff that we've got listed for this week. And I will say it looks a lot more daunting than it really is. Um, and uh, and also let's note that we are halfway through the course. So we will have a lot of our culminating assignments due in these last couple of weeks. But I wanted to walk you through what's listed this week because some of it, usually what I list is due the following Tuesday. One or two things are due next Tuesday, your Handmaid's Tale second half questions and your resources for your final essay, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But other than that, it's kind of prepping you for what's coming later in the course. So I'm going to just go through the list here really quick. So your assignments, if you look under your week 5 assignments, you'll see view the instructor video, and that's really important. And again, if you're hearing me say that, you already know that. But for instance, last week, there are a lot of folks who did more work than they needed to, or the week before last on the Mercy test, because you only had to do 10 from both of the sections, but that's okay. Of course, this week you want to finish reading The Handmaid's Tale. And I have included questions for the second half. I've included the test, but I'll get to that in a minute. The test is not due next week. So this coming week for The Handmaid's Tale on November 21st, just the questions are due, and you'll upload those as an attachment. Now, like I said, I did also include the instructions for the Handmaid's Tale final test. That is not due until November 28th, and it's different than the last test. It is structured much differently. It is actually a traditional essay test. As you'll see, there are 3 essays, and you get to pick the 2 that you feel most comfortable with. So if you're done with the book, or don't need the whole week to finish the book and the questions, you can go ahead and get started on that. Some people may have more time over the holiday. Some people may have less time. So I'm just trying to give you guys a chance to plan accordingly. So if you have questions about that at all, let me know. I am going to put up a discussion board again this week. That way, if you guys do have any questions or want to discuss anything in there, you can. And like I said, you're always welcome to reach out to me as well. So that's the last of what we need to do with the Handmaid's Tale. And again, I'll remind you about the final essay next week. It's important though that we'll talk about that next week. The rest is, as you may recall, and as I've tried to remind you as we've gone through this, throughout this whole semester, you should have been picking at and reading the book Educated by Sarah Westover. That is the book that we're going to write this final literary analysis about. So I've included a couple of videos, a 10-minute video and like a 5-minute video of Tara Westover being interviewed about her book. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most compelling, one of the most interesting. I could not put this book down. I was reading it on a subway train in DC and almost missed my stop and almost wished I had, so I can keep going. But it's a really good book. It's a memoir, so it's a true story. And when you hear some of these stories that she talks about the home she grew up in, you will be absolutely mortified. And it talks about the effect that education had on her and what it has on people, and how it helps us grow and become more than we are, and early on. So so you have those 2 things to watch to kind of have an introduction to her. Hopefully you've already started reading. But then after that, I go ahead and give you the introduction, the full bit of instructions for the literary analysis paper. And again, the final draft of this paper is not due until December 12th. But you have a lot of opportunities along the way to get points in this process. You'll get points for the research assignment that's due this week that I'm going to talk about. You'll get points for having a draft. You'll get points for outlining the paper, in addition to the final points that you'll get for writing the paper, as a whole. So I just brought up the document that I attached this week to your in the module that outlines the literary analysis paper. And I'm going to read through this and it might take a minute, but I think it's worthwhile just because it is a very, very specific paper. You're going to have 5 sections of your paper that do 5 very different things. So the structure of this analysis paper is built around the premise that an author's work is affected by his or her life experience and the historical period in which she was working and living. Therefore, you will present information about each of these topics before diving into an actual analysis of this piece that you have chosen. Actually, I chose this one for you, but I have done this paper in a couple of other classes. Please note that the paper is divided into sections noted by Roman numerals. I would also like your paper to be divided that way. Therefore, your introduction should actually start with like Roman numeral 1, introduction, and then have a paragraph. Roman numeral 2, biographical sketch, and then have a paragraph. Please adhere to all MLA style guidelines. I have linked to a couple of MLA resources, including a sample works cited page and a link to the Purdue OWL, which is online writing lab for MLA, which is a great resource. So I would recommend having that resource bookmarked on your computer at any time. Okay, so the paper itself, the introduction should be 75 to 125 words. This should consist of a well-structured intro to your author and her work. So you will mention, or you'll say her name, you'll say the name of the book. So in the novel, or excuse me, in the memoir, Educated by Tara Westover, we see the life of da. So a short introduction, names the title, names the author, and then ends with a strong thesis statement that should let your reader know the focus of your paper. So if your focus of your paper is going to talk about education, that should be your thesis sentence or statement. If it's going to talk about unschooling, which is an issue in it, if it's going to talk about the power of misinformation, which is also part of it, whatever you're going to focus on is going to be the thesis of your paper. So the second section, biographical sketch, 300 to 400 words. This will be a short story, a short life story of your author. It is easy for this part to get long, so be choosy about what information you choose to include. It should be the most important information that truly gives the reader insight into what made your author tick. The nice thing about reading a memoir is you don't have to do a lot of research on the author's life, because in reading the book, you're going to get a lot of that. So notice the book can be one of your sources. So if you want to quote from it, that's fine, but it doesn't count as one of your 5 research sources. If you decide to quote the book and list it in your works cited page, that will be a 6th source. So just so you know, we'll get to that. The third section is the historical setting at 250 to 350 words. Discuss the important historical happenings of the author's lifetime. How did these events affect the author's work? How did the author's work affect culture? What comment was the author making about this period in history? Even if your author wrote about a different time period, they're making comments about their own period as well. So she's really talking a lot about her own time period. As you read the book and learn about kind of like this cultish, almost anti-government, anti-establishment life that she was living and the way that her parents raised her, you might want to look at that. This corresponds a lot with a big movement toward that in the United States and in other places of the world. So you might want to just talk about what was going on in that time period and how people were kind of getting pulled into this idea that they couldn't trust anyone or things like that. Kind of like the misinformation that is now so common in our media and in social media especially. Okay, number 4, this is the part that can be a little bit challenging, and it's where you're going to use a lot of your research, the historical setting, and definitely in this analysis. So I'm breaking this into parts because it is a little more complex, 250 to 300 words, and possibly different from other assignments that you've done. So first, I want you to, again, it says choose a piece, but I've already chosen it for you, and discuss its content, what it's about, and its significance, why it's so well known. This book was huge when it came out 5 or 6 years ago. Why do you think it made such an impression? You can assume that I've read the book, which I have. So there should be very little summary. Like when the beginning of this section should be kind of like 3 or 4 sentences, much like I presented the book to you. This is a book about a woman who grew up and, without any formal education. They were isolated from society. Her parents felt had some very unusual views, and then later she was accepted into college and became a scholar, and this is how it affected her life. Something like that, okay? Just really general. And then find critical analysis of this piece. What do the critics say about this piece? Often students say they can't find critical analysis. It sounds like scary, or it's like there's some, like it has to be titled critical analysis, but really critical analysis is anytime another writer or expert is writing about an author's work. So I often joke with students is critical analysis is anytime a writer is writing about the writing of another writer. So it really anything you get that is talking about why she's writing, how she's writing, for, you know, the style and she's writing, it totally counts as that. Then lastly, I want to know, like, give me a paragraph about what you think about it. I actually want you to use the word I, like, and talk about your response to the book. If you say you didn't like it, explain why. If you did like it, explain why. What were the things that you like took away from it when you think about the book after being done reading it? What are your big takeaways? Did you like the mood that was created? Did you relate to the characters? Was this plot suspenseful and compelling? Then I want you to think, like, what is the lasting impact of this book when people talk about this book 50 years from now? Lastly, you write a nice conclusion, 100 to 150 words. A good conclusion ties all main points together and leaves the reader with a lasting thought. In this paper, you've looked at the author's life, the world the author's living in, and then a sample of the author's work. And in your conclusion, you should tie all those things together and say, therefore, after reading this book and having researched it and found all this stuff, this is what my conclusion is about the author and her work. Okay. Just making a comment on how all these things are related to each other, because they really, really are. Okay. Now the second page of this assignment detail is the nitty-gritty. It's the requirements. Note that the paper is only complete when it has met the following requirements. You must adhere to the word ranges for each section of the paper. That means the bare minimum is 975 and the max is 1375. 2, your correctly formatted MLA works cited page must list 5 different sources. Again, 5 research sources. If you choose to use the book as one of your sources, that would be a 6th source, because that is a primary source document. Resources that or research that you do about that document are secondary. So we're looking for 5 secondary research sources. And again, you're welcome to quote the book, just add that as a 6th source. The paper must be formatted using the latest MLA style. Again, I've added resources in there. I'm also going to add a little thing about how to cite your sources, but we'll talk about that even more as we go into the actual writing of the paper and the drafting in a couple weeks. So if you look for your, and you must use parenthetical citation to cite your sources within the text. So that means anywhere there's a quote or something that you pull directly from the from a source, it needs to in parentheses at the end of the sentence, it should say like Smith 1. So it would look like, I'm making this really, really high tech here. That would be the end of your sentence right there. Okay. And that's whether you quote it. If it's quoted, you would definitely have it. But anytime you have something that you didn't know or a statistic that you pulled from something, even if you put it in your own words, you still need to have those parenthetical citations. So your due dates, and this gets us all the way to the end of the semester. The only additional thing other than The Handmaid's Tale is we'll be finishing up reading Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, excuse me. She's written a bunch of different books that I've read. Daring Greatly, and there'll be some reflection questions on that and some reflection essays that will not require research. They will just be on your own response to the book. So those are definitely going to be a little much easier than the things that you're doing with Educated. So just so you know that. So your research for this literary analysis is due November 22nd. Your outline, which I'll assign next week, will be due November 29th. Your draft will be December 6th. And then your final draft will be due December 13th. I think I might have said 12th, but I meant the 13th. Which is basically the day that all of the work for the end of your class is due. So that is what we're looking at this week. Again, there's going to be information here too on MLA citation. The work site is really important to submit again by Tuesday, that has those resources. And there is, like I said, a sample listed here as well. Next week, I'll talk to you a little bit more about citing those sources and outlining your paper. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions, and I appreciate all the work you guys have done this semester. You're doing a great job. Thanks.